Hi, everybody. My name is Alice Loy, and I work with Creative Startups. And we're the organization that has been helping the New Mexico Economic Development Department make plans for hosting a new division, the Creative Industries Division, which is new for the Department of Economic Development. But there are a lot of people who have been doing amazing creative industries development work across the state. And so this week with Creative Industries Week, we partly wanted to celebrate all of those people and also offer opportunities for people to connect and share ideas, maybe challenge the status quo and make their priorities heard. And today we are talking, not just today, but today one of our conversations is around rural communities, which we are fortunate to have a lot of in New Mexico. I think 1 in 4 New Mexicans lives rurally. I know I do. I live about 15 miles outside of Santa Fe on an old horse ranch. And a lot of us love New Mexico because it has rural places. However, a lot of us are also wondering how we can help those rural places thrive. And so today we have with us Emily Gojkovich and Jennifer Watkins. Emily is in Lordsburg, New Mexico, and Jennifer is based in Oregon, but works nationally and does a lot of work in the Mississippi Delta area around issues of rural economic development. So I'm going to ask these guests to spend a minute introducing themselves, whatever you want to share about your work, maybe why you love working with rural communities. And then we'll move into the topic of how rural communities can engage with economies beyond, through export, through exchange, beyond their own economies. So maybe we'll start with Jennifer as a guest to New Mexico.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you, Alice. Thank you all for having me today. I have to share that I was born in Albuquerque many years ago and didn't live there long. I grew up there for several years and then moved to Oregon with my family. But New Mexico is still very near and dear to our hearts, and we do get back quite often to visit and see the sights. We just absolutely love it there. So thrilled to be here. As Alice said, I am in Oregon most of the time. I do travel a lot for my work. I'm the co-founder of a nonprofit organization called the Alliance for Rural Impact. And as you can probably guess from the name, we are focused on rural communities all across the country, but mostly in our target area of the Mississippi Delta and the Mid-South, where we really try to focus the majority of our work. But we do have a lot of different things that we help communities with. The creative economies and the creative industries, this is a big portion of what we work with in these local communities because we know that rural communities are just so unique. This is why we love working with them. It's why I'm very devoted to it. I live in a rural community in Eastern Oregon, have all my life. But there's a uniqueness about rural communities that we want to be able to keep, and we want it to thrive, and we want that culture to continue for a very long time. So that's why I like to work in rural communities and why I think that creative economies is really where it's at when it comes to rural community development.
Thanks for being with us. Emily?
All right. Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Emily Gojkovich. I'm actually wear two hats in a rural community like most of us do. I am the economic development specialist for the city of Lordsburg, and I'm also the executive director for the Lordsburg Main Street. I am fairly new to my role of almost 1 year there in Lordsburg, but I've been working in the Southwest New Mexico region for 12 years with the Southwest New Mexico Council of Government. So I covered a huge territory of rural communities. And I am actually a native of Silver City. So yeah, I live at rural too, go rural. And I think most importantly is that I really love it just because uh, I want to make sure that we give our kids something to come back to. I know I always tell our youth, it's okay to go and do what you want to do, but you can always come back and have a mailbox in one of our communities. And one of the things that I really love about rural is even though most of our communities are anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour away from each other, we consider each other local, right? And we have to because we don't have the human capacity or the financial capacity to do things by ourselves. So I'm really happy to be here and so thankful that they asked me to be a part of this.
Well, you've been doing amazing work in Lordsburg, so we're glad to have someone of your skill and expertise join us and share some of what's been working. So I guess that's my first question for you guys. Um, in the communities in which you work, what are some of the strategies, especially maybe the strategies that are a little weird or feel kind of niche, but indicate a pathway toward larger sets of strategies for rural communities? What are some of the things rural communities are doing that work to bring dollars in, to keep jobs, and to attract people to keep that community, kind of replenishing its population?
Well, I think that that's the crux of it, really, is what is working in some of these other areas. And when we're thinking about creative industries, we really need to think about what do we mean by that. And so there are several areas that we use to help define that creative economy, like value added arts and culture, for example. This is really, we all have local artisans, we all have cultural assets, but when we start looking at adding value to those, how do we create an arts collective? How do we do an artist residency program? What do we do to develop some sort of cultural center for the arts that might draw people to the area? These are things that you can build on to really focus on, yes, your local talent, but actually make more of it in some other way. Thinking about specialty foods and the culinary arts, that's a really great way to generate new interest from the local folks and from folks coming from other areas. Thinking about things like design services, architecture, graphic design, landscaping, architecture, engineering, software development, all of these things are really are part of that creative economy, and they require some very creative thinking to get done. So looking at those assets in your community, you might not always think, hey, that's part of our creative economy, but it really is. And building something on that can be really fruitful. Film and video production, New Mexico does a great job with this, but there's always more that can be done there. So that's a wonderful strategy, and not everybody takes advantage of that. And then, thinking a little bit differently about maybe some other sectors, so more industrial sectors. So advanced manufacturing. This is something that we're hearing much more about these days. We have a lot of new technology coming down the pipe. And so thinking about, how do we turn some of our creativity into more industrial type jobs, or even encouraging creativity in our curriculums at school so that our employers have kids that can think creatively when they come to work and think critically. That's so important. Specialty tourism, that's a very big one. People are going crazy about outdoor recreation and cultural recreation, and they want to have really local activities and experiences when they get there. So that's something that is a really popular, but unending. I mean, you can have everything. There's no limit to what you can actually really have in a specialty tourism sector. And then when you start thinking about innovation, cyber technology, all of those things really require a lot of creativity. So those are very unique assets. They're not really just, okay, we have arts and culture. These are other things that build on those, that creativity, and that ability to think creatively.
Yeah, I love it. I love the idea of thinking about residencies. And interesting to think about marrying residencies, artist residencies, but within industry. I mean, there are opportunities to do sort of cross-fertilization, I guess, that came to mind while you were talking, Jennifer. Emily, what are some of the things you're seeing?
Well, I'm in a unique position in Lordsburg because I pretty much have a clean slate. So we've been really working on really figuring out who Lordsburg is as a community and staying true to that. And so we've really been working on our tourism campaign, which is a great partnership that we have with New Mexico Tourism Department. We're hoping to get more into the film sector. We have some really great assets that people don't really realize that Hidalgo County has as a whole. So we're getting ready to ramp that piece up. And then, of course, just being along I-10 and not very far from the US-Mexico border, we are in a unique position also with the Members Pacame Trail that's close. Of course, the CDT either starts or ends in Hidalgo County. And then
Really?
yes,
What is the
and then
CDT? Let people know what the CDT
oh,
means.
I'm sorry, it is the Continental Divide Trail, and
Yeah.
it goes from pretty much from the Mexican border, US-Mexican border, all the way to the Canadian border through New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming,
I think it's the
Nebraska.
longest
Although,
trail in the
yeah,
US.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
oh, that's
11.
amazing. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, so just building off some of those really unique assets also that Hidalgo County has. So, um, yeah, like I said, I have a clean slate, so we have pretty cool strategies right now, and hopefully we can refine those as we're moving forward.
I'm interested, Emily, to follow up on this. Lordsburg is working on figuring out who we are and staying true to who we are. And within the world of economic development, that's a new way of thinking, I think. There for many years was sort of, oh, if only we could be, and people sort of look to the coasts to say, oh, like them.
Yeah,
And that's changing, which is great news for the creative economy, because that's,
yeah.
yeah, as Jennifer was saying, who we are is expressed through our creativity, our culture. Share a little bit, you guys, if you don't mind, on how you're seeing economic development shift toward a different mentality, if you're seeing it. Maybe you guys are the only ones thinking this way.
Uh, well, no, I don't think we are the only ones thinking this way at all. Um, for years it was economic development was just very cookie cutter, and there was just such the same approach across the board. Oh, you have to go develop an industrial park and try to attract somebody to come live there. Uh, it doesn't work in rural communities, and it doesn't work in a lot of communities, frankly. But I think that, what we're really seeing and what we have seen, especially since COVID, is that people are finding more appreciation in their smaller communities. They really love the individualness of these communities, and how they can be themselves as well. They can be individuals. Rural communities kind of get a bad rap sometimes, but they are extremely accepting of all folks, and so it takes everyone to make a rural community work. So they just try not to exclude anyone from coming and living their lives. So I think that that is definitely starting to to show itself in how economic development is being done, especially in these rural areas. There's so much more focus on, downtown development and on cultural development and on, recreation and tourism and things that allow you to kind of keep your community's assets in place. There are still a lot of challenges, of course, in these rural areas, and hopefully we can start generating some new income into those into those communities to help restore some of our infrastructure and housing and things like that. But yes, I do think that focus is shifting a lot. That cookie cutter approach is just not really working, and people are wanting to have walkable, livable communities, and that's starting to show.
What was the process, Emily? Or was there how did you guys go about figuring out who you are so that you can then stay who you are?
Well, I would say that the first thing that we did was we did a whole branding campaign with actually some ladies that are a marketing firm that just do rural communities, which is awesome.
cool.
So they really understood what it meant to really look at the community and look at its history and maybe where the future was going. So with that, we came up with the slogan. So those of you that are not familiar with Lordsburg, the community sits at the about 13 miles from the Arizona border on I-10. And then there is Highway 70, which goes then back into Arizona through Duncan to Safford. But then also Highway 90 up into Silver City. So it's kind of like at a huge crossroads, right? So really looking, and the Butterfield Trail had come in through over time as well as the railroad. So with that, we came up with the slogan of the trails of the past meet the highways of today. And really that's where we're at. And I think, that's Lordsburg was built around transportation. So really just figuring out that piece. I would echo Jennifer's comments. I learned very early on as being a practitioner that smokestack chasing or cookie cutter economic development was not going to work in rural communities. We cannot fulfill 200 employees. We're lucky if we fill 5 or 10 jobs, but to fill 200 or more jobs is just not feasible, as well as the infrastructure that has to be in place in order to do that kind of recruitment is expensive, and our rural communities cannot afford that. So I have always been a cheerleader of the Main Street program. It's, grassroots, rebuilding your community. And so it in my mind, that is more economical, feasible for rural communities, really following those 4 points of economic development. So of course, I'm going to give New Mexico Main Street a plug because they have really amazing contractors and staff that really help handhold a lot of rural communities that need to happen. I mean, some people have not been doing this work a long time. So just trying to navigate local government and infrastructure and grants and you name it, they really help move the community forward in that aspect. So, and there's lots of Main Street communities in New Mexico. We just came back from Main Street America Conference, and I can't even tell you how many times I've heard state directors say, your state program is like the model. So just for those of us that always feel beat up in New Mexico about being last on every known man list created, Just so you know, on economic development level, they're seeing New Mexico as one of the top players. So
That's
That's
great.
great. It's not surprising. We think
Mhm,
the world of our Main Street leadership and practitioners too. We've been really
mhm,
impressed.
yeah.
So let's get real though about jobs,
Mhm.
right? I mean, I'm guessing maybe Jennifer has some stats nationally. Where are we at with jobs and populations in rural communities?
Well, it's been very interesting because, the economy in rural has changed so much over the years, but just in the last few years, since right before COVID to now, the population in rural America has kind of shifted, and suddenly there's been a little bit of a change. So there's been a net migration coming to these rural areas overall. Now, not every rural area is seeing that, but certainly that has been a most welcome shift for rural communities across the country. When you look at some of
And
these
by net
areas,
migration, you mean people are coming back into rural communities.
coming.
They're
Yes, there's
growing.
a population increase overall
Mhm,
in rural areas as compared to before, where we were losing
mhm.
every year for 25 years. So it's starting to shift another in the other direction, and we want to, of course, maintain that shift. Now, there are definitely areas where things are growing more, and some counties are not seeing that. There are definitely parts in eastern New Mexico that are still struggling with some population loss, but there are other parts of New Mexico, other counties where they are seeing some gain. So, we hope that that will continue um, happening, and that growth will really continue happening. But rural America itself, it takes a lot longer for rural America to recover from any kind of recession. So even as of 2022, um, a lot of rural America really had not recovered, but the labor force participation rates are getting they're getting close. They're pretty close to where they were at the peak, and that prime working age unemployment, which is well, anyway, it's prime age working age employment. It's like up to 54. They usually have that age bracket in there. It kind of peaked during COVID. That unemployment rate for that age group peaked during unemployment, but it's actually started falling drastically now. So that's good. Those folks are getting back in the workforce. So not everything is doom and gloom in the rural economy. Things are kind of looking up just a little bit.
That's my sense. I think COVID did afford an opportunity for some rural communities. Have you guys seen programs, incentives, marketing campaigns from anywhere in the country that you've thought, oh, that's smart. They're really making hay as these trends shift and as some people say, I don't know if I really want to live in a city.
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, first of all, the investment in broadband is going to be one of the most critical investments that can be made in these rural areas.
Absolutely.
And if we can speed that process up, that would be really helpful.
No
But
pun
at least,
intended.
yeah,
Yes.
but it's coming. And so we have to keep the gas pedal down on that. It is
Mhm.
so critical for any part of the rural economy. Um, but I think that um, for the communities that I've seen, so many places have really focused on um, that quality of life pitch. So it's not necessarily even about coming for a job. It's about coming for a lifestyle and finding the job to fit that once you get there,
Mhm.
or bringing the job with you because you can work remotely, which is why that broadband is so important. So,
Mhm. Mhm.
but that's really what so many, I think, of these rural communities that are really successful are pitching is we have the best quality of life that you will find anywhere. Now, of course, you have to live up to that once they get there. So that's important for communities to really focus on those amenities that people are looking for, which is a great downtown. They want to have some good housing, good schools, some access to healthcare, and usually something to do. A lot of it outside, but not everything. So that's what people are looking for. And the communities that have done a good job building that are really starting to see some success.
Hmm.
Mhm.
We have been talking a little bit, and I'm curious, Emily, what your thoughts are about how we could build bridges between what we call our Rio Grande communities, which are, Santa Fe, Taos, Santa Fe, Albuquerque, Las Cruces, which eat up all the resources and attract all the incentives and all the things, right? But we're wondering what ideas have worked or projects or concepts have worked where a rural community is in charge of a relationship with a larger community and has figured out how to build something that benefits both. Because when we think about rural communities as these stores of assets, right? There is a lot about rural communities that urban communities can learn from and can benefit from. And I'm wondering if you have seen, I'll give you an example. So we long ago started a program in libraries, and we now still run programs, Creative Startups does, in public libraries. And one of the things that we came across is in Gallup. In Gallup, there is the Fill-In Public Library, and it has some WPA art from the Depression, during the Great Depression, because those are obviously projects that happened everywhere. And our library there still has some of that art up. And we thought, wouldn't it be interesting to do murals that tell the story of people migrating across New Mexico? And that's a story that hatched in Gallup, but could have life in Albuquerque and elsewhere. We never did that project. It's not our job to go build mural projects. But it was this moment
Great
for us
idea.
at Creative Startups where we said, okay, rural communities are like harboring amazing assets and stores of cultural knowledge, obviously experiences today, all these things that urban communities sort of suffer from, as Jennifer said, the uniqueness. Urban communities, it's like another PetSmart, another Couchmart, another, these strip mall lifestyles. Have you guys seen projects where big cities and small towns have worked together to do something interesting where everybody wins and you've bridged?
Mhm.
Because part of the challenge is the isolation, right? I see you guys
Right.
going, I don't know. And we've looked for examples.
Trying to
I don't
think of
know.
something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if in the Q&A, if people have questions or ideas around this, we are on the prowl for examples of, so Albuquerque partners with Lordsburg to do something. And it could be that it's the art center of Lordsburg and 516 Gallery in Albuquerque. It's not necessarily municipalities.
Mhm.
But there's something very exciting about that, and it brings people out to rural communities.
Yeah.
So shifting gears a little bit, one of the things that people have said they need to figure out how to do more and more is have people come out to rural communities and stay longer. And you brought up residencies.
Mhm.
That's an area where we think there's a lot of interesting opportunity. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Emily, does Lordsburg have residencies or Silver City or
No.
other communities you've worked in?
I Silver City might, but as far as Lordsburg, no, they don't.
Okay,
Mhm.
okay. Jennifer, are you seeing that?
Yeah, I have seen a few of them, and they are very, very interesting. There's some over here on the east side of Arkansas, in that Mississippi Delta area. Some artist residency programming that they've done. They've developed some artist apprenticeships, and really found places for people to live. I mean, it really is kind of a grassroots effort. But it's been working out very well, and that's kind of growing into some graphic design apprenticeships and things like that. So that's been very, very interesting. I haven't seen a lot of them, but I have seen a few. Now in Vermont, they have quite a few artist residency programs up in that area. Uh, that's one place where they really do a nice job. So do some good stuff to copy from up there. But I think it's just starting to catch on in other places. In my town, in Baker City, Oregon, we have kind of something like that where we have, it was an old school, an elementary school that has been kind of turned into an artist hub. They do a lot of, they've turned the classrooms into studios, and they have places for people to stay. They have kind of a hostel area for people to stay if they just need a bunk, or they have some of the rooms they've turned into kind of an Airbnb type of thing. So that's pretty interesting to use an old school that way.
Yeah, that's
And
really
I
interesting.
know in Ajo, Arizona, they did the same thing to an old school where they turned in the classrooms into studios, not only livable studios, but working space studios. And then they have like an open air theater that they've created there as well. So I mean, it's happening, and Ajo's just as rural as we are.
Yeah,
So
yeah, it is.
um,
It's a small
it,
town, yeah.
it's, yeah, it's just one of those things
Yeah.
that really to have the passion to get that uplifted.
Mhm.
A
Mhm.
couple of comments. Cynthia, can everybody see the questions? I don't know in this webinar format if folks can see the questions. Let me drop, Cynthia has put up a link to the Carrizoso. I'll just drop that in the chat so everybody can see that link. Somebody asked an interesting question about housing supply,
Mhm.
right? Because
Yeah.
housing in rural communities, and what are some specific plans that you guys are aware of I'm going to read this out, for a prosperous future where people are moving to rural places and need housing? What are some of the
Mhm.
plans to make housing available for people in
Mhm.
rural communities?
Yeah. Well, that is a big challenge, and everywhere we go, certainly, rural housing is just a real big issue. But there are some efforts out there. There's a place in Kentucky, I think it's called Grove, East Kentucky, something like that. Anyway, they're starting some new housing programming where they are a nonprofit organization, and they're building affordable worker housing. So I think, it's nothing really all that unique or exciting, but it's what's needed out there. And so I think that there's got to be, we've got to start looking a little bit outside of the box instead of saying, well, only we got to get some developers in here to build housing. We're going to have to look at our nonprofit organizations and at our housing authorities and folks like that to start thinking creatively about what housing really looks like, and have a good mix of housing that is not just, oh, I've got a 3-bedroom, 2-bath,
Right.
2-car garage. We need to look at our downtowns for, loft apartments or townhouses, things like that, that could be done with reuse of buildings. Um, there's a lot of really good space in rural communities that is not being used, and adding a new subdivision out on the edge of town is
Right.
not necessarily how we want to go about keeping that that feeling that we love of our rural
Yeah.
community.
Yeah,
So,
Colorado has done a couple of things. I'm sure New Mexicans who drive up to Denver have seen. Trinidad obviously has done some interesting work. Pueblo has done some really interesting work converting beautiful old brick buildings that were, I'm sure, manufacturing facilities into cool loft, live work, creative spaces, and attracting creatives from Denver who can't afford to live in Denver anymore. So it's
yeah,
an interesting, but it still has that vibe of, as you're saying, it's not the burbs outside of a rural town. It
right,
feels lively. It feels hip,
right. And I think we need to look at our existing neighborhoods in a lot of cases. I mean, the rural communities that we all live in, we all know those areas of the community where the housing is just very run down. There has not been any investment made. What can we do? What can we do as a community, as our cities, as our county governments, whatever it might be, to bring in some resources through USDA, for example, on their energy improvements, whatever it might be, to really help reinvest in those properties and bring them back up to a real, higher quality of life and a higher quality of livelihood for the people who are there, and create some wealth at the same time. Because we don't always need to start thinking about building new. There's a lot of reuse that we can really do.
It goes back to what Emily was saying around Lordsburg, it has a history, and if you're going to market that history, then you got to bring that history back into life and sort of breathe life into those buildings and those places. Somebody asks an interesting question around how might it work to bring successful artists or creatives back to a community where maybe they grew up and now they're very successful. And there's a project in New Mexico. I don't know if it's still going. It's called the Boomerang Project. And it's that idea of getting people who grew up in New Mexico, who really would prefer to live here if they could make a living here, doing what they're doing or whatever it is. And so Jessica asks, do you think that an artist that has found success and left the community would be willing to return and train local aspiring artists, to give local artists an opportunity to enter new markets, et cetera? I'm interested, Emily, in Lordsburg, have you guys tried anything like that or seen success in attracting boomerang people? And
Well, actually, I think it's COVID that has brought some people back.
yeah.
And actually, we actually just did gain an artisan who did a lot of work at the Hard Rock Museum in Cleveland.
Oh,
So
cool.
we're happy to have him and his family back into Lordsburg. But not only for artisans, but I think just small business owners as well. I mean, we have 3 families that have come back and started new businesses. We've actually had, unfortunately, we had a tragedy of the grocery store owner passed away, and his son has actually come back. So, a lot of it has to do with family, and that sense of belonging. I think for some of us that have left and then come back, for me as well. I mean, yeah, I've been here most of my life, but I have left Silver City. The one thing is, you always miss that. Oh, well, we're going camping. Oh, well, we're going to so and so's for dinner. Oh, and in the big city, you just miss all that because you're so busy doing whatever it is that you have to do in the big city.
Yeah, just trying to
Most
keep
of
on. Yeah.
in the you're driving most of the time, but
Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
True.
I think really just having, once that people come back, I think having those conversations with them of, you know, how do we build something that you can help give back, and whether that's through maybe giving a stipend back, or I think sometimes, unfortunately, in rural communities we expect everybody to give back for free, and that's not fair, right? So I always make sure, like, if somebody offers to do it for free, then yeah, for sure, then let's have that conversation. But be really have that conversation of what can we do to make it worth your time as well, because everybody's trying to make a living too. And then I would also just preface that until we get our broadband situation settled in rural New Mexico, or rural America, period, I think that's going to be a struggle, really, to entice people to come back into our economies without that connectivity.
Mhm.
Are there ways that the Creative Industries Division or people on the call can participate in advocating for broadband? How are people doing that? I mean, I know we have like a broadband,
Office of Broadband Technology.
Office of
yes,
Broadband.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So what I would say is what's hard is that there's so much grant money that's out there right now. And I know in a lot of, fortunately, a lot of Southwest New Mexico is seeing some of that grant money come through. Um, but what I would also say is that contractors, engineers, supply chain are all bogged down.
Mm,
It's happening all across America. It's not an isolated incident. And then also the next thing is, New Mexico is not flat like everybody thinks it is. And so there's really rough terrains in between places. So that also um, causes an issue when it comes to broadband. I think that our legislators get it. I mean, I've sat through enough interim committees and legislative session to know that they get it. So it's not the advocacy part, it's the part of how do we get people trained to get it in the ground to get us connected? I
interesting.
think is more the issue.
Huh.
I think
Wow.
that's correct.
You're
Mhm.
seeing that, Jennifer, elsewhere?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it is.
Huh.
That's very common.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Interesting.
but
Um,
always keep the pressure on for sure. I keep the pressure on.
So where are some areas where you're seeing the creative industries mix well with sort of more either, as you said, advanced manufacturing or other industries that are
Mhm.
interesting ways that rural communities could think, oh yeah, we actually have that kind of industry here. I hadn't thought of it as being in some way relevant to creatives.
Mhm. Well, I think that there are definitely some areas that are doing some unique things. I think about here in Mississippi, the Golden Triangle area, which is kind of Starkville, Columbus, and West Point, there in Mississippi. They are really focused on advanced manufacturing, and they have developed with their community college, East Mississippi Community College, a Center for Manufacturing Technology Excellence.
Hmm.
And that has really, it's really spurred a lot of economic growth, a lot of new manufacturing growth. They have really state-of-the-art facilities that they are using to train workers in all kinds of new jobs for the future. So that's a very good example of a community that's really looking at advanced manufacturing as a possible solution. And these are poor areas, they don't have a lot, but that's a really wonderful one. I would say that as far as a few communities out there that are doing unique things, there's a little town in Oregon that is, I mean, we're talking little, 137 people, but it's actually grown by like 5 people in the last few years, because they
Traffic
have
has
built,
gone crazy there.
it's gone nuts, right? But they did this whole, they did a whole campaign around the adventure tourism there in and around them. They are kind of out in the middle of nowhere. They have the Painted Hills area next to them, but there's just really not a whole lot that's close by. They're not near a big city anywhere. So they are on a highway, so they focused on what they had. They have hunting, they have cycling, they have ATV trails, they have the Painted Hills, and so they developed a whole strategy around it and added some support systems like
That's great.
B&Bs. They
Mhm.
added some hostels for lodging. They have little cafes and coffee shops, camping areas, and they did some shuttle services for people who are cycling, so that they or other or other visitors. They can
Wow,
take your
that's
stuff from one
cool.
place to another.
Yep.
So, I mean, this is a wonderful, there's some easy things that can be done. And it has completely turned that community from a ghost town into a really thriving little community. So, if they can do it at 137 people, we can do it anywhere.
Yeah, for
Mhm.
sure.
Mhm.
That's so exciting. A friend of mine works in Detroit, and he's a designer. He runs kind of a creative tech firm, and his clients are all the big automotive companies. And I asked him, how many people do you think out of, 100 people who work for one of the big automotive companies are creatives? And he said, if you'd asked me that 20 years ago, I would have said one. And now I'm going to say pretty soon it's going to be half. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, robots build everything.
Right.
So you need people to design the robots, which is a creative job. And then you need a few people to build the robots, put them together. But more and more work that for 100 years, Americans have thought of as heavy industry is becoming creative, which is really interesting. And so when you brought up other industries earlier, I thought that's an exciting area for people to think about, and
Yeah.
especially for rural communities. Um,
Well, it is, and it's so important because, whether you are, or if you have some opportunities for the youth to learn how to think creatively, I mean, that's going to be
mhm.
the most important thing for them because no
Mhm.
matter what they do with that, they're always going to be able to use that skill. Employers, that is the number one skill that employers are looking for in the world is people who can actually think creatively.
Yeah.
So, developing those skills in your youth is going to go a long way to for whatever whatever industry, whatever direction you want to go in your community, and it would just be a great help to society overall. So, that is a really critical skill that so many people are kind of missing out on, but it's really urgent that we have it in today's world.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, when you say that, we all kind of go, oh, artificial intelligence. And we start to wonder, what will the role of humans be? Um, and COVID brought a little bit of that, as you said. It sort of gave us this peek into a world where we don't all just go into an office and type all day, right? And I think
Mhm.
people said, huh, I don't have to live my life like that. Maybe I'll move back to Lordsburg. Maybe I'll go live in the Mississippi Delta. Maybe I'll go live in rural Oregon where I can walk out my back door and go ATVing or hunting. And so rural communities do have a really exciting set of opportunities and a lot of challenges too. Um,
Mhm.
so we have
Yeah.
just a few more minutes. Cecilia Pacheco, Emily sends you a big shout out and a hug for doing all the amazing work that you are doing for New Mexico. Thank you, Cecilia. That's nice. We've been impressed by Emily too. Um, but I want to give everybody a chance to ask any other questions, or if you want to put something in the Q&A, I can drop it in the chat for people, or you could just drop in the chat, I think. I don't know if the chat is off. Um,
Mm.
and there will be a recording of this. So if you have a colleague maybe who missed this, or you want to relive any moments from the last hour, you could watch the recording or share it. But we have just a few more minutes if anybody has any questions. Any last
Yeah, I
comments
would I
you
would
guys
like
want to share?
I would
Yeah.
like to thank Cecilia for the shout out. She's we worked in my previous job, we were working together on entrepreneur stuff, and really the UNM Rainforest Cafe is really a great opportunity for our rural communities and their um business questions. I can't say enough about that program, and I thank you for the shout out. I
Yeah.
um
Yeah. It's fun. I saw a lot of friends, a lot of people who I haven't seen in a while come in on the attendance list. So it's fun to see your names there.
Yeah. Okay.
Are there any challenges or precedent projects that have been successful in revitalizing abandoned Main Street buildings into live-work spaces? Code seems to be discouraging. Yeah, that's a really good
Yeah,
insight.
Jessica,
Yeah.
that's a good
Yes.
question.
Yeah. How can
Uh,
we go
Code is
ahead?
always an issue in these historic districts for sure. Um, there are ways that you can work around those. There is a very interesting project going on right now in LaGrande, Oregon. So that's another small town in Eastern Oregon. They have a population of about 12,000 people. They have a very nice downtown. A block off of their main street is kind of a warehouse district that has not been used. It was used by the railroad for many years, but it hasn't been used for a long time. They are actually seeing an interest from some folks that are really creative industries, people who started businesses in their basements during COVID and have now grown to the point where they really need additional space. So they are designing and they're working with the Brownfield program and EPA and USDA to look at how they can take those existing buildings, clean them up, and make co-working spaces for these entrepreneurs and artists to develop their goods and really send their goods, distribute their goods, and maybe even having some shared marketplace areas and also some living spaces in some of those as well. So I mean, this is several blocks that they are actually looking at redeveloping there. And they have about 2 or 3 dozen of these businesses that are looking to go in. So that's a really nice project that is just something I learned about recently. That's pretty cool.
That's interesting. One of the things that we have found through our research in building the plan for the Creative Industries Division is the power of new business models where, it's a collective or it's a collaborative or it's a co-op and people coming together because so many creative businesses are 1 or 2 or 7 people. They're not 700 employees. And a lot of people like me prefer to work in organizations that aren't 700 people. And so that shouldn't be the goal that every business has to become huge. Um,
Mhm.
but there is a lot of power in then you have 12 or 18 businesses come together to say, hey, all together we want to buy this block and rehabilitate it and go after and that's an area that I think New Mexico in general could become a real leader in. We're fortunate to have a history as a more community oriented kind of people, a little less individualistic here in New Mexico. And that means that we have the sort of cultural and mental wherewithal to think about new business models around co-ops, collabs, and things like that.
Yeah. Now here's another example of one I heard about recently that is extremely interesting. And this is very good if you have some vacant space in your downtown or somewhere like that. They had, again, some small artisans, craftsmen that wanted to have a market. So they had a vacant space. And so they brought in the small, like garden shed things, buildings. And they got several of those and they put them on this vacant lot. And every week they would allow these merchants to come in and sell their wares out of these garden sheds. And it has been a wonderful thing. They have about 20 different merchants that come every week. They open it up to even more about once a month. And then 5 of these businesses pulled together and bought an abandoned gas station and turned it into a co-market space.
That's
And
so great.
it's just fabulous, it works so well. And this is a little town, about 500 people. So that's another way to do it.
That's fantastic. I love it. I love it. Well, I
Yeah,
think
I
I'm
would
gonna,
say that
yeah, go ahead.
I would say that yeah, the co-op idea has really, I think, taken off in rural New Mexico. Um, I learned about a little small gift store in Reserve, which is 150 people, who had about 5 ladies who rented a storefront, and it's kind of like a boutique shop. They all have different stuff in there that they booth rent, and then they take a day of the week that they work the space. So not where they were married to their business, basically. And then I had, through some work that I've done on the entrepreneur side, one of the training classes that we did, I had suggested this because we had a whole cohort of nothing but creative people, and they've taken an old train station down in Columbus, New Mexico, right on the border, and created a space. But what I would say to the question about getting around the codes, you can't, unfortunately. But what I would say is that make sure that you're plugged into your main streets. There's a lot of advocacy that happens during the legislative session. So we hear about a lot of the bills that legislators are trying to move forward. When Representative Dow was in the House, she tried to pass a bill where you would be able to work while renovating your building. So you're gaining income while doing. Unfortunately, that did not pass, but we hear about all that kind of stuff all the time. And if we can go to the legislative session in great numbers, including business owners and artisans, whoever that may be, to support the Main Street work or those legislative bills, I think it would make a bigger impact than just a few of us there.
Yes. Yeah, I would like to echo that loud and proud, because here in New Mexico, we have the Creative Industries Division, and it has been allocated a little bit of money. But the challenge of keeping a show of force among us creatives, among us chickens, including our rural communities, including our Native communities, immigrant, everybody, we've really got to band together. Larger industries benefit from, we have Intel here. Well, they have 2,000 employees. It's really easy for them to sort of say, hey, we need this. Why don't you pass this? It's harder for us, but there are more of us if we band together. So I just want to kind of echo that, because that will be so important for us moving forward. So, well, out of respect for everybody's time, I'm going to go ahead and bring this session to a close. Emily, thank you so much for calling in. And Jennifer, we are very grateful for you sharing sort of a national perspective. You guys are both doing amazing work with our rural communities. Can we share your emails if people ask?
Absolutely.
Okay. If folks who are listening in, if you want to ask us for the emails for these ladies, we're happy to send them back to you. I don't know that we can share them in the chat. I suppose Emily might be able to drop them, another Emily who's lurking, but we'll make sure we get you those emails, because you guys have a wealth of knowledge. And I know there's
absolutely
we want to build on that. So thank you everybody for joining us, and have a great evening.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.